Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and in today's video, if I seem just a little bit uptight at the beginning here, it's because I'm aggravated that I wasted a lot of time attempting a recording just before this, where for some reason, my mic just wasn't working, my mic was not recording. No idea why that was the case, but it just wasn't coming through. I had to close my recording software and open it back up again to make it work. Technology, audio issues are the best, but yeah, in this video, audio issues aside and personal frustrations aside, we're talking about the end of The Path of Daggers. Path of Daggers has been a pretty surprising book for me up to this point. I spent about 4 hours and 15 minutes, in fact, pretty much exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes reading the last handful of chapters this weekend, I guess, at the time that I'm recording, because I'm recording this hot off the heels of recording Diary 3 yesterday, even though at the time you're seeing this, it's obviously come out last week. I'm very much ahead of schedule as far as the diaries go this time around, mostly out of necessity. But again, those 4 hours and 15 minutes were just kind of finishing up the book. You would assume that with how quickly I went through it relative to previous weeks and how much less pages, or how many less pages I read over this week's reading compared to the last few diaries, that this video will probably be a lot shorter than previous diaries, but I'm not entirely convinced that'll be the case. I'm certainly hoping it will be, fingers crossed, because the last 3 diaries have all been incredibly lengthy, much to my own chagrin. And I want this one to be a little bit shorter. But my total reading for this week, for I guess for the actual month, for the entire reading of the book, was about 26 hours. So even though Path of Daggers is the shortest book in the series, barring New Spring, about 25,000 words shorter than The Dragon Reborn, as an example. I actually spent a couple hours longer reading this book than The Dragon Reborn, and a couple hours shorter reading this book than The Great Hunt. So kind of right in between those two, which is a little bit surprising. But there were a couple moments of this book that definitely went by slowly enough to kind of make me understand why that happened. There were a couple moments that were a little bit slower paced, that I wasn't into quite as much, and there were certain things that I was a little bit disappointed by at certain times, including what I talked about already last week about like some of Rand and the Shan-Chan stuff, being a little bit underwhelmed by that material. But going into the reading this week, in a spoiler-free angle, I will say I was actually I really enjoyed a lot of what I actually read here at the end of the book. I was rather satisfied by it in a lot of ways that I wasn't exactly expecting, actually, because most of the major storylines in this book, and even combining with the one major storyline that ended in A Crown of Swords that did not appear in this book, that being Matt's plotline down in Abu Dar, all of these plot lines ended in a place where they feel satisfactory, where they feel like a proper ending, despite also being a cliffhanger at the same time. And to say cliffhanger is not really an understatement, because basically every one of these has something pretty major happen in the final moments that is like, oh wow, yeah, that's actually a big development that has implications for the very next book, for example. So a lot of these plot lines have pretty good and heavy potential for the next book or two. And even though I know the first half of Winter's Heart isn't beloved, and I know that Crossroads of Twilight is the least popular book in the series by and large, I still am kind of excited to see where a lot of these storylines go, because I'm not inherently disliking of basically any of these plot lines at this point, and I'm also not a fan of basically any of the characters, excepting, of course, Serene and her effects on Perrin as a rule, even though that hasn't been as much of a bother for me in this book specifically. I'm just kind of looking forward to seeing what reading the future books entails, what reading these next 3 books in this kind of arc from 7 through 11 entails, because I know they get a lot of grief, I know they get a lot of hate, I know that they get a lot of complaints in certain regards, and in some of those ways I'm kind of wary of myself. But if it's anything like The Path of Daggers, where I came into this like fully expecting it to be the weakest book, the fact that it is the weakest book in the series up to this point doesn't bother me. Like, I actually like this book a little bit more than I feel like I should, based off of, you know, the more objective metrics of its content, as much as you can really use those kinds of terms. Some of this I said in last week's video, I know, and I'm going to be repeating some of the same sentiments in, I don't remember if it's next week's video or not, but in my review of the book entire. The point is that a lot of this stuff was actually enjoyable, and especially the ending of it was, even though I was a little bit underwhelmed by a couple specific sections of the Path of Daggers, a lot of the rest of it was actually way better than I expected and genuinely enjoyable. In fact, just to kind of give you a little bit of a spoiler for what my Goodreads review on this is going to be, since I don't really give star ratings in these types of videos, and I don't do them in my normal review videos on the channel either, the Path of Daggers, I think, is like a 3.5 star. Whether I round that down to make this the first 3-star of the series, or round it up to be 4 stars alongside some of the other books in the series, I'm not entirely sure yet, but like, I still actually enjoyed this quite a bit in spite of its flaws, in spite of its problems, and again, was largely satisfied by this ending because all the storylines come to a conclusion that doesn't leave me wanting in a way, even though they are cliffhangers, and I'm like excited to see what happens with them, what they were actually doing in this book, or, you know, in, I guess, the last couple of books, depending on how you look at some of them. They've come to a conclusion that is satisfactory for their own purposes. I'm looking forward to seeing where they go in the future because, yeah, there's definitely a lot of great potential here. I anticipate that I'm not going to dislike the slog, quote unquote, whether or not it exists, we'll discuss in later videos. I feel like I'm not going to dislike this sequence of books as much as most other people do. Again, because I'm not inherently hateful towards basically any of the major characters or their storylines. And even the few characters that I do mostly dislike at this point, I've enjoyed in this book and have been being able to view from a different angle in ways that has been actually pretty good. So I guess from this point on, we'll go ahead and jump into the actual spoiler-filled stuff, and we'll talk about what's going down here. The first couple chapters of the reading here, chapters 25 and 26, are White Tower stuff, so stuff actually happening in Tarvalon and around that area. Some actually pretty big moments here, some pretty big implications for the future of the series within these 2 chapters. I actually really liked these chapters. Having read them pretty shortly after reading the Rand and Shan-Chan stuff, I was actually really, like, my hype for the book was increased again because, again, I was kind of underwhelmed by the Shan-Chan confrontation last week, but this Tarvalon stuff was like, this is actually really cool, really good, really great, and then I was into it again, and then the last few chapters kind of, you know, do the same thing, keep up the hype. Where chapter 27 goes back to Rand and him and Min in Carrion, you have some stuff going on there. You go back to an Elaine POV in chapter 28, which kind of finishes off her plotline in this book. 29 comes back around to Rand and Min again, reacting in slight bit at the very beginning to what happens in Elaine's POV, but we'll probably talk about the Rand POV chapters here, 27 and 29, together just for the sake of ease, and, you know, we'll mention the relevant issue of it when we talk about Elaine's stuff afterwards. And then the last chapter of the book, the last full chapter of the book, I suppose I should say, is the Perrin and Zareen stuff, and then also wraps up a little bit with the Aes Sedai Rebel plotline, so Egwene's stuff, which all of these plotlines I largely enjoyed in this book. It was only really Rand's stuff that I was disappointed by in regards to the climactic moment, I guess, question mark, of the Shan-Chan confrontation, but even then he still had a climactic moment within his couple chapters here, and that was satisfactory to me anyway. And then the last chapter, chapter 31, is not even really a chapter, it's an omniscient POV, it's just talking about, like, just kind of going on. I could talk about chapter 31 right now and not even spoil anything from prior. It's really just an epilogue. It's less than a page of an omniscient narrator that's just kind of listing some of the rumors in reaction to some of the events of the previous, like, chapters 29 and, chapters 28 and 30. Man, I don't even know which ones. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make too much of a difference. The point is that chapter 31 was basically just a short epilogue kind of wrapping up saying, hey, like, there's a bunch of rumors that kind of exist because of some of the happenings of this book and also a little bit of last book, and that's where we're going to be starting off the next book. That's all that that last chapter does. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and start off talking about chapters 25 and 26, like I mentioned, being White Tower stuff. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. So chapter 25 starts us off with a meeting of the sitters of the White Tower in Tarvalon, discussing various different matters of political import, including crowning certain people of their own choosing to kind of usurp a Rand in certain regions like Carrion and Tyr, Ilion as well. I don't remember if they mentioned Andor or anything, and I don't know why they wouldn't at this point, but I don't remember anything like that being mentioned. Either way, they're trying to replace Rand as a ruler in various different regions of the world, discussing the possibilities of that. They also discuss some of their doubts about the existence of the Shan-Chan, not necessarily as a people, but with the tools that they're using at their disposal, most namely the Adam, the bracelets, the ter'angreal that allow them to control magic-wielding women. They're basically disbelieving entirely that these ter'angreal could exist, let alone could be made to exist for any reason, so they're not entirely sure what to think about that. And then they also discuss Egwene's band of Aes Sedai in Merindy, where they've been kind of camping out, and after last week's reading in which Egwene announced that the entire army would be just sitting there in Merindy for a month resting before they end up traveling to Tarvalon to go ahead and take it and lay siege upon it and, try to take it back from Elaida. That is something that is going to happen probably very soon. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later as well, but they discuss these rebels down in Merindy and assume that they're just kind of stuck down there because of the weather, because of the snow, because of the sudden change and stuff, and anticipate that it's going to be a lot of months before they're even capable of making it to the White Tower, so we don't really need to worry about them right now, is basically how they feel. After this kind of meeting, after this meeting, a lot of the sitters are just about to walk out, and Elaida's keeper, named Alviarin, returns after having been apparently away, just kind of having disappeared for a couple of weeks. She returns to make Elaida direct some more chaos, sign some more laws to put in place, things to do to, again, sow chaos, because Alviarin is, of course, Black Aja and in service directly to Messiana, who is hiding in the tower to some degree, and Alviarin is making Elaida do more of this stuff, even though she's been gone for a couple of weeks. She's still, in the service trying to make sure that the tower basically does the will of the Dark One. You also switch POVs about partway through the chapter, where you go back to Alviarin directly, where she is reporting directly to Messiana afterwards, reporting to her about some of the recent directives that have just been distributed under Elaida's pen, and asks about seeing Elaida deposed, maybe in favor of herself, maybe in favor of somebody else, but Alviarin's of the opinion that we should have someone of the Black Aja directly as the Amerlin seat, because that would make it a little bit easier to do some of these plots without having to blackmail somebody, because Elaida doesn't like Alviarin, knows that she's being blackmailed, of course, and being manipulated by some dark force, and suspects Alviarin of being Black Aja. Even though I guess what the understanding that I kind of came to from a comment, I can't remember who commented on it. It was probably Jarek, like normal, but I think mentioned in the last book that Elaida doesn't believe that the Black Aja exists, but definitely suspects that there's some stuff going on with Alviarin, and so wanted that kind of routed out a little bit. Either way, Alviarin's discussing with Messiana here about some of the stuff that's going on. Messiana brushes off the idea of deposing, instead asking Alviarin to see about there being meetings between the Ajas. There have been some meetings about some of the various different Ajas going on, and basically wants some of that routed out. Why are some of the heads of the different Ajas meeting with each other secretly when they, in public, make as if they don't get along, even though they do? So there's some question marks around some of that, some of the inner political stuff, some scenes that we got in the last book that kind of, are relevant to this discussion, and some scenes we're about to see very soon as well. And Messiana also muses about Galena, so the Black Aja leader, basically, who's now subservient to the Shaido Aiel, specifically, Galena no longer being around to complete these tasks, so now Messiana has Alviarin doing it. Alviarin, I guess, at some points during this meeting, during this discussion with Messiana, notices part of Messiana's dress, despite Messiana trying to keep herself shrouded so that nobody knows who she is or what she looks like. therefore can't really find her hiding in plain sight amongst the tower. But Alviarin notices part of the dress and hopes to catch her unawares in the tower at some point by maybe recognizing the dress at some other point somewhere else. So some interesting political stuff going on there. But we see the next chapter have another couple POVs, another couple scenes that I found really engaging. Again, really important. Maybe not important per se, but definitely some pretty big implications of stuff going on. We have Ciane and Pavara still investigating potential Black Aja in the tower, as commanded by Elida in the previous book. And the two of them have basically kind of pinpointed one person who they think might be suspicious, whether or not it's Black Aja specifically. They have somebody who they believe isn't necessarily telling the truth about something that she's done. This person actually ends up being one of the rebels, from Egwene's camp, so one of the Aes Sedai that was sent to Tar-Valon to kind of sow discord within the White Tower directly from the inside out, kind of infiltrating in that way. So Ciane brings one of these rebels named, I guess, Zira, however you want to pronounce her name. She brings her down to have a sort of meeting underneath the White Tower with Pavara, where they make her retake the oaths, so that she has to, and also make her take oaths to obey them as well, so that she has to answer their questions and that she can't lie about it to kind of ensure that she's not broken away from the oaths to some degree. Zira, under the influence and under the command, having to obey them, reveals that there are 10 of them who've come from the rebel camp in the tower, and also ends up giving all of the names of them, all the people who came from Saladar. So even though they aren't dark friends, now at least a couple of the Aes Sedai within the tower know about, spies, basically. That's what's going on here. Then suddenly, within the scene, you have a few sitters of the hall enter, after Zira has left already, having been commanded to bring back some of the other rebels for their own questioning at some point in time, with the command that she's not able to basically reveal to them that anybody knows about the spying or about the infiltration, we'll say. But after Zira's left, a few sitters of the hall, a few of the other sitters from the hall come in, basically to question Pavara and Ciane, because they've noticed that they've kind of been sneaking about. So they have come in wondering why they've been snooping around, come to ask them directly. They discover here that they have an oath rod. The oath rod is what Ciane was using to make Zira, swear not fealty, but, swear to actually obey the two of them, both her and Pavara, and also to retake the oaths. That's kind of important to note that she has to have an oath rod here to make that work. But the sitters of the hall who've come in here, just kind of sneaking up on them, discover that they have an oath rod, kind of instinctively understand what it is that they're actually doing here. So all 6 of these sisters here are made to re-swear the oath against lying to each other, and also say immediately afterwards that they aren't of the Black Aja, that they aren't dark friends. But one of them, named Taylene, reveals herself by refusing to follow suit with saying she's not Black Aja, so she's kind of like tipping her hand here that she's probably Black Aja to them. So that's an interesting scene that occurs. You also have another scene here that is outside of the White Tower. Technically, it's closer to Camelin. It's closer to the Black Tower, actually, because Tovine and the rest of the White Tower group, who were sent to the Black Tower by Elida to kind of take care of them, having, underestimated the Ashaman, thinking that there might only be a few men who can channel, rather than a very large amount of them. Tovine is now down here and is stopped near their destination by some of the Ashaman, who've kind of detected that they're here. All of the Ashaman have all of the Aes Sedai shielded already. Tovine commands the guardsmen to attack the Ashaman, and the women all scatter. She has them all scatter so that they can maybe get out of sight of the men, having assumed that because they're men wielding, because of some of the other men that she's had to deal with in her time, that they'll lose the power that they'll break away their holds, break away the shielding that they've done on there if they like get out of sight of the Ashaman. So kind of a foolish assumption there, but not really anything else she could really do in that way. But the Ashaman are commanded not to harm the Aes Sedai, and one of them, who it turns out is Logan, ends up capturing Tovene directly. Many of the others are captured otherwise as well. Logan bonds Tovene as a warder, as a way to get her to calm down, stop fighting him. So yikes moment right there. But either way, Tovene basically commits to make a lie to pay for the consequences of her order, making such a small amount of the Aes Sedai and guardsmen come down here just to be kind of ambushed in this way. So actually kind of looking forward to seeing what happens in the future with that, because that's a pretty intense development, actually, like really sudden. And I wonder how that actually interacts with some of the stuff that happens in Rand's plotline here. That's a good question. We'll see what happens with that. Maybe I'll remember to comment upon it later. Either way, we move into chapters 27 and I believe 29. Yes, where we'll be talking about basically the Rand POV for this section of the book, for the very end of the book here. 27 sees Rand having returned to the Sun Palace, worrying Min after having been gone for several days and now having Ilian's crown. So, we remember at the very end of Crown of Swords, Rand just decided to kind of disappear suddenly. And then he came back to be healed after some stuff went down regarding Padam Fain and another dagger from Shadar Logoth, all of that crazy stuff. Gets healed by Flynn, one of the Ashaman, and then all the maidens make him promise that he's not going to leave without them again, and then he literally immediately goes and leaves to Ilian to go take care of Samael, just point blank, and that's what the end of the Crown of Swords does. So here in this scene, you have Rand actually returning to the Sun Palace, again having worried Min, being gone for several days, not really having said anything. He now has Ilian's crown, so proving that he has taken the country for his own. You also have Dobrain come in to meet with them as well, because he realizes Rand is back, and he comes back to be able to update them to say that Torum, who's the guy that Rand sparred with at the end of A Crown of Swords before he got hurt by Padam Fain, and then Padam Fain himself, have both disappeared. They're just kind of gone. Nobody knows where they went. And then that Caroline Damadred and Darlin, so people that were part of that rebel camp where all of those events in A Crown of Swords took place, that these two are still in the Sun Palace, and they're kind of being guarded, not allowed visitors, and that they're not allowed to visit anybody else. So they're being watched here in the Sun Palace. Min comments in her POV here that the two of those, Caroline Damadred and then Darlin, will also marry at some point, that Darlin will be a king somewhere at some point in time, and that she will live longer than him. So a couple of viewings that she has had regarding those characters that she talks about here. You also have Marana and Raphela arriving in this moment to give Rand some of the terms that they managed to come to with the Sea Folk regarding what Rand wants from them, which is, be able to have as many of their ships as he needs for whatever purpose he needs them for, whenever he needs them. So they've come to agreements and terms along these lines without having the influence of the power, which they note because Rand had kind of left on some of those meetings, some of those negotiations in the last book in the middle of them. And apparently it was his Tavern Nature that was getting the Sea Folk to agree to anything for him at all. So they had shielded the Aes Sedai against being able to use the power to influence them. So the agreements weren't quite as good as Rand would have liked because of that. Rand doesn't actually see very much issue with some of the terms. The first couple of them were kind of acceptable until it's revealed that Rand must have an Athenian ambassador group with him basically at all times wherever he goes, and he's pretty furious about this and another one of the terms, but that's something else that happens here in that chapter. Wonder what the Sea Folk what kind of influence on the series the Sea Folk are actually going to have, because they haven't really had that much of an influence overall, aside from like kind of transporting some people at some times, and then of course the Bull of the Winds plot line where some of them were involved with using the bull. That's right about the only stuff that they've really done in the series so far, so who's to say what's going to come from that in the future. The Aes Sedai were able to keep the terms that the terms of the agreement that they made with the Sea Folk out of the hands of Cad Swain specifically, but Rand decides that he has to deal with Cad Swain anyway, even regardless of this fact, because Min views that he and the Ashaman need her teachings for some reason, whatever those teachings might be. There's something that they need from her, so Rand decides to go and try to confront her. He sends for her, has somebody try to go get her for him, but he only gets, another Aes Sedai that comes instead, saying that she won't come to him. Some of the maidens also come in this chapter as well. Some of the maidens that made Rand promise that he wouldn't leave without them, they come in and then beat the crap out of him for dishonoring them, for, promising, yeah, I won't leave without you, and then leaving without them immediately afterwards. So that was actually a pretty funny moment in a way. Like, it's kind of pitiful, but it was also funny. They beat the crap out of him, but also tried not to hurt him. He actually had these unhealable wounds. So, it seems like they had some remorse for having to do it, but it was part of the honor, and Rand says that they had the right to do it, that they earned the right to beat the crap out of him, so, he's not going to do anything about it, because he did it to them, but that was a funny moment. After this, Rand and Min decide to go to Cad Swain directly, trying to intimidate her to basically no effect. At some point in the discussion, Rand ends up asking Cad Swain to be his advisor in Ilion, since he's now the king of Ilion, so kind of an advisor the way that Elida was advisor to Morghese in Andor for a while. Some of these stuff going on. Cad Swain basically refuses to do that, except with some certain promises and offers, including not taking any oaths to Rand, because she refuses to do that. It seems like these kind of Aes Sedai advisors typically take oaths to whatever ruler they're advising, but Cad Swain would refuse to do that for Rand, but she also makes some promises that, like, while she would do some other things, or while she would do some things to some degree, she would not do other things to kind of, I guess, invade his privacy or so. I don't know. I don't remember the exact terms themselves. It doesn't matter, because the two of them don't seem to really come to a full agreement here. Maybe they do at some point, but it didn't seem like that happens here. Either way, Cad Swain reveals to Rand at the end of the chapter that Kalendor is a flawed artifact, because Rand had just tried to use Kalendor, and Cad Swain had said, I hope you aren't trying to use Kalendor. I hope you didn't try to use Kalendor and whatever the heck you just tried to do out there. Because in order to use it safely, apparently Rand has to be linked with 2 women for some reason. And also one of the women has to be the one, like, leading or guiding the flows of the magic. Not entirely sure why that's the case, but that's what she says. So Rand suddenly is considering that, like, okay, maybe I'm not strong enough to actually be able to wield Kalendor effectively, so he has to come up with some other, high magic option to be able to give himself a lot of power, and I guess is starting to form plots along those lines. So he abandons the future of using, or he abandons the idea of using Kalendor in the future, it seems like, in this moment. But then chapter 29 sees a little bit of a time jump because of something that Elaine does in chapter 28. Rand seems to be pretty distraught with her, thinks that Elaine doesn't want to see him anymore. Min tries to make him go to her to actually meet with her directly. Just silly kind of argumentative stuff going on here, silly emotional stuff going on here with characters. Different character relationships, dynamics that are pretty amusing, I guess, in this moment, but that's really all that really comes to here, because the main parts of the chapter are way bigger than whatever the heck starts off here, with Rand being a little bit distraught over Elaine. Sorelei brings 5 more of the Aes Sedai who had participated in kidnapping Rand to him directly. Like, she brings them to him, which is kind of suspicious until the Aes Sedai are here, apparently begging to be given the same treatment that they gave Rand, begging for, comeuppance, for, punishment for doing what they did to him. Rand asks them in turn, of course, for obvious reasons, why it is that they're changing their minds now, like why it is they had done what they had done, and why they're kind of asking to be punished in the same way now. They all kind of give their different answers. Some of them are more blunt, some of them are more flowery, so they all give reasons that Rand basically accepts. So he makes them swear fealty to him, and then Min also has a viewing regarding all of them, including Sorelei as well, not just the 5 Aes Sedai, but including the wise one, saying that all 6 of these women will indeed serve Rand in their own way. So Rand's, pretty comfortable with allowing them to swear fealty to him as a result of that. So now Rand has more Aes Sedai on his side inherently. So that's an interesting thing. Sora Lee tells Rand as she's about to leave as well that Cadsuane is back in the palace again. I guess having, coming to and fro from the palace multiple times over the time in Carrion here. I guess in between the chapters she must have left and come back or something along those lines. But Rand decides that he and Min are going to go see Cadsuane again, but this time Fedwin Moore, the one Ashaman that's been with Rand for a little bit, with the one that healed Rand from the crossbow bolt that hit him in the arm by the Shanshan. But just outside, while they're going to go meet with Cadsuane, just outside of Rand's chambers, an explosion occurs in Rand's chambers that destroys it. Apparently, it was something done with the male half of the One Power. So, they very well nearly all died, the three of them, but Rand decides that he's going to go and find the perpetrators while he has Fedwin Moore go to take Min to safety. Rand finds and is attacked by a few of the Ashaman in the palace, so there's a few of them that have formed a betrayal against Rand in this moment. So Deshiva is the foremost among these people, which is a little bit of a surprise to me, but interesting to note. Rand protects himself with a very particular shield weave that he acknowledges in himself that he doesn't know or that he doesn't understand, implying that it's something that probably only Lews Therin knew as far as the magic goes. There's also a particular mention in this same moment when Rand was shielding himself through a weave of Lews Therin's, I guess, that Lews Therin seemed to also be like reaching for the power at the same time as him, and he was letting both of them kind of like rage together. So I'm wondering if there's some particular aspect of Rand and Lews Therin that's actually coming together now, that's starting to come together. Don't know what that would be, but seems like something's going on there that could be interesting, whether they're like combining into one person or if there might be somehow or some way that they end up splitting. I'm not entirely sure. Like, really have no idea. Don't have any reasonable guesses either. It's just something's got to be happening with these two because it feels like there are too many of the mentions of their dynamic with each other that feel too pointed, that feel too targeted, to be unintentional on Robert Jordan's part. So it makes me wonder on some of that stuff. Rand is unable to find Deshiva or the other Ashaman who attacked him in the palace again, even though he had felt somebody use the power in strong enough, I guess in a strong enough manner to form a gateway. So he assumes that these people have left, but he still wanders the palace for hours trying to find them. He also comes across a couple other Ashaman like Narishma and Flynn and attacks them. Kind of unclear whether he did that intentionally or not, assuming them to be against him or not, but they call out to him. It's just like, it's just us. And Rand makes the excuse, oh, I didn't recognize you, even though he knew it was a lie. So wonder what his dynamic with any of the Ashaman in general now is going to be. But that is a pretty severe betrayal moment, a very big moment with big implications for the future of his storyline here. A little bit later in the chapter, Rand and Min are in the lower levels of the palace, and apparently Moore has lost himself to madness, which I guess was hinted at a couple other times in the book, but I hadn't really taken note of too particularly, but it was something that had happened. Now Moore is completely mad again, basically child-minded. Min has been able to occupy him with wooden blocks, basically toys to use now that he's in a mad stage, which kind of goes to show just how young of an Ashaman he was. Kind of disappointing and disheartening, even depressing to some degree to see this happen, but it definitely happened. In this moment, Taim comes to report deserters from the Black Tower. He kind of shows up at the palace, witnessing some of the destruction, some of what's happened. He's just like, well, it seems, Rand, or Lord Dragon or whatever, that I'm a little bit late to tell you, but there were some deserters of the tower, and he lists some people like Roshad and Gedwin. Rand tells him to add Deshiva to that list, which seems to surprise Taim specifically. So, question mark, I guess. Not really sure why it is that Taim's surprised by Deshiva specifically seeming to be one of the deserters, one of the ones to attack Rand, but he does have notable and visible surprise to that. Rand at this moment also slips a drink to more, using an herb to poison and kill him, and thus to free him from the madness, and tells Taim to return to the Black Tower and not come back to Carrion. So, yeah, again, some pretty big stuff, pretty big implications for Rand's storyline. After Taim leaves here, Rand decides to go into, I don't know, kind of just leave Carrion to some degree. I'm not entirely sure what this entails, and I can't tell if the suggestion was that he wants to go into hiding or if he just needs to go somewhere else because he's in danger here in Carrion. Either way, he and Min kind of make to leave. And that's where his storyline ends. Although I do have a little note here that I wrote down that was like a side note and a question, because we remember the Rand confrontation with the Shanshan in last week's reading and all the moments of him getting sick and having splitting vision whenever he would touch the source and the power. Why is it that all of a sudden when Rand is back in Carrion here, he's able to use and also hold on to the power so much and not have this nausea, not have the sickness, not be affected by it in the way that he was for the rest of the book prior to this, where he was having issues with it? I'm kind of curious to hear what this is. If that was something that was resolved in the Shanshan chapters that I didn't notice, I would like to know. And if that's not something that was resolved, why all of a sudden is it different here? Because that feels like an oversight if it's not a resolution that I just failed to notice. Because that's a little bit weird. Either way, yeah, that's what happens in Rand's storyline. So we'll jump back to chapter 28 now and talk about the little bit of Elaine's storyline to end off the book. We see some of the tensions rise in between some of the Aes Sedai and the kin, as the whole group is still traveling to Caemlyn here, because one of the Aes Sedai, Adeleas, has discovered that one of the kin, Garenia, is a runaway novice, and she kind of takes Garenia to Elaine directly to say that she must be put back into the novice white, because runaway novices are required to be put back into the white until they become Aes Sedai. As a result of this particular occurrence, Kirstian, one of the other kin women, submits herself for being a runaway as well, despite her claim that when she ran away from the White Tower would make her put her much older than even Adeleas is, who I guess is the oldest Aes Sedai amongst the group here. So, there's a little bit more tensions among these lines here. Eventually, the kin basically decide that the Aes Sedai are in charge and let go of some of their misgivings, so there's some tension still between them while they're traveling to Caemlyn here, but they kind of let things go for the moment. They let things be fine for the moment. We'll see how long that kind of thing lasts. A few days later, Kirstian comes to fetch Nynaeve and Elaine, because Lan has apparently discovered that Isbin and Adeleas are both dead here. Both of them poisoned and paralyzed by an herb that Nynaeve recognizes as Crimson Thorn, and then subsequently murdered in secret by somebody who was almost certainly part of the group traveling to Caemlyn. So somebody within here is a traitor of some sort, maybe even Black Aja, who knows? Nobody's really certain at this point, but what is certain is that Adeleas is now dead, her throat's been slit after having been paralyzed, and that Isbin had a stake it's hammered into her heart. So, no longer going to be able to get any information from Isbin. That's pretty unsettling. And then Adeleas being killed is not the greatest thing in the world. Of course, Adeleas and Vandene are sisters, and Vandene also happens to notice this moment. She comes in, wails over her dead sister, understandably so, as she was the one that kind of put together that Adeleas would not have accepted a tea except from somebody that she trusted, and the tea was where the Crimson Thorn root was applied to, be used against Isbin and Adeleas. So whoever ended up killing these two or afflicting them and then killing them is somebody that Adeleas trusted, thus obviously somebody within the group, within the camp. So that's disconcerting. Either way, the group soon comes into Caemlyn here at the end of the chapter, and Elaine stakes her claim for the Lion Throne and enters the palace as such. She's let into the palace. She's met in the throne room after having, swearing to honor Morgase's memory, because she assumes that her mother is dead still at this point. She's met in the throne room by Dylan, who is, I guess, one of the women who had initially supported Morgase's claim to the throne back when she was rising to it. So Dylan's a supporter there, and Dylan also says that she supports Elaine's claim to the throne, but also warns her that most of the other nobles of the area have either made claims of their own for the throne or may make their own claims for the throne rather than favor Elaine's. So there's going to be some political stuff going on in Andor in the future that I'm actually looking forward to. At the same time, Dylan also asks Elaine about the Dragon Reborn and what she intends to do with him, and Elaine replies that she's going to make him her warder and also her husband, and that's what she plans to do, and also says this alongside a statement that she is going to take the throne by her right, and not because of Rand letting her have it, which, you know, what I mentioned at the beginning of chapter 29, Rand being kind of distraught by something Elaine's done. It's basically this thing because Elaine tears down all of the Dragon Reborn banners in Caemlyn, and again has made the suggestion she's going to take the throne by her own right, by her own claim to it, by her own rightful claim to it, rather than letting Rand give it to her. So Rand assumes this means that it's because Elaine doesn't want him around, doesn't want to be associated with him, and whatever it may be, it's just because Elaine wants the throne, you know, rightfully, rather than because a man, who of course the Lion Throne has never legitimately been ruled by a man. Elaine accepting the throne, quote unquote, from a man is just something that would be kind of against her own honor. So that's what that entire thing is about. There's also another short POV here at the end of chapter 28 of David or David, I don't know what the specific intended pronunciation of the guy's name is. A guy named Hanlon, David Hanlon, I don't really know. Somebody who was mentioned recently in one of these past couple chapters as well. I don't remember in what capacity, but he was mentioned. I just recognize the name. But you have a POV from this guy also arriving in Caemlyn kind of around the same time, going to a very particular building where he watches Cheyenne, and not to be confused with the Aes Sedai, with the Aes Sedai sitter who we had a POV from a little bit earlier. These couple of these names are just a little bit closer than they should be, because I was genuinely confused when he had this character walking in on a character named Cheyenne when I thought she was one of the Aes Sedai when she's not. But she's here drowning Carradine, you know, the Inquisitor, the White Cloak Inquisitor that's been around, I guess was kind of chasing Matt around some of the stuff that was going on in Abu Dar in the last book, centered around Carradine. Cheyenne is drowning Carradine for having failed to do whatever it is he was supposed to do in Abu Dar, and Falion is also here. Again, Falion also failed to do whatever it was she was supposed to do in Abu Dar, you know, in regards to the Bowl of the Winds. So Falion is treated in a similar manner. It doesn't seem like she dies here, so she's not like specifically drowned, but she's still treated rather harshly, even though she promises to actually obey Cheyenne to any degree, you know, whatever the case may be. But she has failed Moradin specifically. This is mentioned in the chapter. She failed Moradin in Abu Dar, so both these characters getting punished by a couple other characters. I guess we'll see whatever happens with these characters in the future, because Ispen's dead now. Falion is... who knows? I don't even really care at this point, to be honest. That's just what happens at the end of that chapter. So yeah, that means that we are now at chapter 30, effectively the last full chapter of the book. This video is a little bit shorter than I had thought it would be by this point, which is great. Chapter 30 begins with first a Perrin POV and then a Zareen POV, kind of wrapping up this little storyline here, because we actually get some time jumps in this chapter. Thank you, Robert Jordan, for actually realizing that you don't have to cover every single day that goes on in one of these books. Perrin and some other people have actually made it to Abila, where apparently the prophet of the Lord Dragon has been. And apparently Alliandre's not with Perrin here, even though I had thought in the last Serene POV she had managed to kind of manipulate Alliandre into agreeing to go with Perrin to meet the prophet. So why she's not actually there to meet the prophet with Perrin now, I don't understand. There's some disconnect here that I feel like I'm missing. If that's a continuity error, that's a pretty major and noticeable one for even me to be able to notice it. Maybe I missed something, but I don't know. It just seems a little bit weird to me. Either way, Perrin goes to meet with the prophet here and actually has a meeting with him. Perrin and his group are allowed to meet him, and Perrin essentially commands the Prophet to come with him to Carrion. The Prophet refuses to do so via traveling, via anything that touches the One Power. Perrin's kind of unwilling to reveal to him that the Ashaman exist, that the Ashaman are able to wield, and he refuses to do anything that the Aes Sedai are able to touch. So Perrin's like, okay, I guess we're going to ride to Carrion now. We'll see how long this takes, but you're going to come with us. Even in spite of Rand's order to make sure that the Prophet comes and that nobody knows about it ahead of time. But that's the way that Perrin's POV ends there, so that's setting up a new stage to his storyline for the next couple books, I guess. But the real exciting moment, I guess exciting, I mean like the real eventful event, is meanwhile in this moment, Zareen and some of the others back in the camp, and apparently Alejandra is here. So again, I still have that question. Why is it that Zareen manipulated her into agreeing to go with Perrin to meet with the Prophet, and then she didn't go with Perrin to meet the Prophet and instead is here hawking with Zareen and some of the other people? I don't understand why that is, but either way, they get some word back from some other people, from some others back at the camp, that apparently Masama, the Prophet, has been in cahoots with the Shanchan to some degree. They determined that this is probably something that Perrin should know, so they want to go ahead to give Perrin some of this information, but they are instead sneak attacked by the Shido Aiel of all people, who are just around, and I figure that there's going to be some sort of confrontation in this region between some of these groups of people, and my inkling that I had on that was correct. The Shido Aiel show up, taking Bane and Shiad, Alejandre and Morghese, and Zareen all captive as Guy Shane to Savannah. So Savannah suddenly has a bunch of Guy Shane, even though some of them aren't Aiel, and Bane and Shiad try to tell the Shido Aiels, like, this isn't right, you're not supposed to take non-Aiel as Guy Shane in this type of moment. But they kind of ignore them and tell them to shut up, stop talking. The only hope that Zareen and everybody really has at this point is hoping that Berylane, who is apparently the only person who seems to have escaped this little sneak attack, is able to find Perrin and basically tell them about what happened, both about Masama's cahoots with the Shanchan and about the Shido Aiel kidnapping all of the rest of them. So yeah, apparently everybody else was killed or escaped. You know, whoever else escaped, who knows, but there are plenty of people that were killed in this attack as well. We also have at the very end of chapter 30 here an Egwene POV, a short Egwene POV to kind of wrap up the storyline, which proves my kind of thoughts that I had last week a little bit wrong, where last week I was like, maybe the attack on Tarvalon, maybe the group traveling and actually making it to Tarvalon to lay siege upon the White Tower doesn't happen for a couple of books or something like that, because Robert Jordan has a bad habit of making some of these books really only last over a couple of weeks or a few weeks or something like that, or having large sections of books cover over just a couple of days, basically, and then maybe being just a few days or something in the future. But either way, not being horribly fast-paced with the movement of time within the series. But the end of chapter 30 does see Jordan actually utilizing a full month time jump, because the Aes Sedai who have been camped out in Myrandi are now ready to jump to Tarvalon. Egwene's proclamations have held true, and they're ready to go. They're ready to jump. They're ready to attack. The group now has a flood of new tower initiates as well. Like, they have double their previous count of novices at this point, on account of Egwene's proclamation to allow anybody who wants to be tested for the tower to be allowed to do so. So that's something that's worth noting as well. But Egwene here in this little moment commands for a gateway to be made, a large gateway via a large amount of linked Aes Sedai. The gateway is opened, and the whole bunch of them travel from Myrandi to the slopes of Dragonmount to wage war on Tarvalon and Elida. So that is going to happen maybe a little bit sooner come the next book than I would have anticipated or planned. Maybe it doesn't happen in the next book anyway, but either way, the time jump happens here, and we get that little cliffhanger. So you have cliffhangers kind of in regards to a lot of the storylines, just kind of wrapping things up here. You have Rand's storyline where, oh no, there's some betrayal with some of the Ashaman. What are we going to do? Rand decides that he's got to get out of Carrion. No idea what he's going to be doing there, but yeah, that's a pretty big question mark of what's going to happen with his storyline. You have Perrin and Zareen, who've been affected by Zareen and co being captured. Perrin's surely going to learn of this information and probably going to want to chase after them to some degree in the next book. We'll see how that goes, because I could see that getting on my nerves really quickly if it ends up being bad. Who knows? And then you have like Elaine's plotline with her basically making the claim for her throne, whatever political stuff goes on with all of that. So basically all of the major storylines, and then also Matt's POV as well, because he didn't exist in this book, but from A Crown of Swords, thinking of Matt coming back and being a character in the story again. He kind of had a cliffhanger at the end of A Crown of Swords as well, with the Ebu Dar being attacked by the Shan-Chan, being invaded by the Shan-Chan, and Matt getting kind of knocked out in the middle of that. Who knows where he's at the moment? I refuse to believe he's dead right now. So, yeah, I'm inclined to believe that we'll get some pretty good forward momentum over probably this next book, with most of these storylines, if not all of them, in directions that I'm kind of looking forward to exploring. We'll see what happens with all of them. Winter's Heart is not that much longer than The Path of Daggers, though, so we'll see how much information that stuff actually covers. Because the interesting thing about Path of Daggers at this point is that, like, a lot of these POVs were pretty short. You had a few chapters, basically. You had a handful of chapters with all of them. And if you're talking about the plot line that the Path of Daggers actually encompasses, like if you don't include chapters 1 to 6, which have the Bowl of the Wind stuff, the Bowl of the Wind's actually being used, if you include just everything after that, basically every character only has like a handful of chapters or less to some degree. You have Rand with like 6, 7, 8 chapters, sort of. You have Perrin and Zareen with, I think, 5 chapters to them. You have Egwene with like 5 and part of a 6th in there. So you like all these characters not actually having that much page time in the book, not actually getting to move their plot lines forward very much, but where that forward progression actually felt a little bit more substantial than I would have expected to see. It's a little bit surprising, actually. I enjoyed Path of Daggers a good bit. All of the reading from this past week was actually quite good. I enjoyed a good bit of it for what it was, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the series continues. You know, as much as the slog may or may not exist, I am looking forward to Winter's Heart, because it's another shorter one, kind of like this. Again, not very much longer than that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what little, you know, momentum we get from those various plot lines, because there's a lot of separate, disparate plot lines moving right now, kind of going along, doing their thing, and I expect that all of these will be making those little bits of progression with each one of these few books. Kind of the impression that I've gotten is that most of these storylines are officially wrapped up for good in Knife of Dreams, so it'll probably take a couple books to really see, you know, where some of that stuff is actually going, and we'll see how well the pacing holds up, because I thought the pacing of Path of Daggers wasn't awful. It was probably the weakest of the series, maybe only barring Lord of Chaos, because Lord of Chaos had some pacing problems and some bloat in the prose that even Path of Daggers didn't seem to have. But overall, like, I guess we'll see. We'll see if Crossroads of Twilight is a horror show. We'll see if the first half of Winter's Heart is a horror show, like I've been made to believe it will be. And we'll see if Knife of Dreams is as satisfying of a conclusion as everybody thinks it is as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of this year, kind of reading the Wheel of Time. But again, at the time of this video's release, it'll probably be about a month before I actually start Winter's Heart. I would have actually optimally liked to just go ahead and read it now and kind of start doing more reading diaries with it soon. If I was really, really crazy, I could have made these 4 reading diaries for the Path of Daggers be like 2 diaries for Path of Daggers and 2 diaries for Winter's Heart if I wanted to read them that quick, but that wouldn't have been very realistic in terms of some of the other work stuff that I hinted at that I've got to do over the rest of spring. So that's what I'm going to be doing with both a crazy work schedule and all of that stuff going on. I'm just not going to have time to read anything else at all. So yeah, going to be a pretty boring months for me here in real life, and by boring I mean absolutely stressful beyond belief. But we'll see how things go. I'll get through it. It'll be fine. But yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing the series here relatively soon, in about a month for Winter's Heart, and then a couple months after that I'll read Crossroads of Twilight. maybe I'll decide to read that a little bit sooner. I have yet to decide. If I get through Winter's Heart very quickly and still kind of invested in things going on and excited by it, I'll probably try to bring Crossroads of Twilight a little bit more forward so that I can make the timing for my reading of Night of Dreams fit a little bit better with some of the other stuff that I've got going on, because my TBR that I had planned for 2025 has turned out to be an absolute disaster with some of the other stuff going on, and none of it's applicable at this point. So no idea what I'm going to end up doing, but you can rest assured that I plan to start Winter's Heart in a month from now. So hopefully that happens. Either way, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching all of these diaries. If you did, I really appreciate it, and I hope that this one wasn't as awful as I feel like it wasn't, because the last couple of these were pretty rough. I feel like this one was a little bit better, so I hope that you agree, and I'm excited to kind of see what you guys think about my thoughts of Path of Daggers. Did you think that I would absolutely despise this one? If so, how do you think I'll react to Winter's Heart? Knowing what you know about my reaction to this book specifically in context with the rest of the series, I'd be interested to know. But either way, thank you guys once again for watching. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.